Okay, let's dive right into this explainer because we're about to completely shatter the way you've probably been taught to measure your financial success. You've likely spent years comparing yourself to checklists, those classic rules of thumb, average benchmarks, all those things that are supposedly telling you if you're financially on track. But what if the very foundation of those tests is just fundamentally broken? What if they're literally measuring the wrong thing entirely? Well, today we're unpacking the math that proves why pretty much everything you thought you knew about measuring wealth might actually be leading you astray.
Let's meet two 38-year-old guys. We'll call them Ryan and Brian. They both earn exactly $95,000 a year, live in the same city, and deal with the exact same job market. Now, Ryan, he rents. His entire net worth is $60,000 just sitting in an index fund, and he automatically saves 18% of his income. But Ryan, he feels like he's totally drowning. Then we have Brian. Brian owns a home he bought back in 2019, saves 4% for retirement, and sits on a net worth of $240,000. Brian passes literally every financial checklist ever made. Emergency fund? Check. Manageable debt? Check. Home ownership? Growing net worth? Check and check. Brian sleeps like a baby. I mean, he has 4 times Ryan's net worth. Not 4% more, 4 times more.
I know how insane this is going to sound when you think about that massive 4-to-1 advantage, but Brian is actually the one in deep trouble here. He isn't doing better than Ryan. He's doing worse. And if nothing changes, he is going to retire with less money than Ryan. Seriously. To prove it, we really have to dig into the underlying arithmetic and uncover exactly why every conventional checklist is lying to Brian while completely terrifying Ryan. So, here is the absolutely crucial point. Every single financial rule of thumb out there measures what we call your position. And position is really just a static photograph of where you stand on, say, a random Tuesday. Your net worth? That's a position. Your checking account balance? Position. Having 3 months of living expenses saved up? Position. The problem is, absolutely nothing about your financial future is determined by where you happen to be standing right now. It's actually determined by which direction you're walking and how fast. We call that your flow. Taking a measurement of your position and treating it like some final verdict on your financial character is, well, mathematically useless. And I'm going to prove it to you right now. To really see how mathematically broken these position metrics are, let's audit one of the most famous benchmarks in personal finance history, the Millionaire Next Door formula. It's super simple. You take your age, multiply it by your annual income, and divide by 10. Boom, that's your expected net worth. Hit that number, you're doing great. Miss it, you're behind. It's the exact kind of back-of-the-napkin math you do at a dinner party. But let's look at what this formula is actually demanding of us. When you lay out the actual math, the flaw is just glaring. If you run the algebra for a 25-year-old who makes $60,000 and started working at 22, the only physical way he hits that target is if he saves an absolutely savage 78% of everything he earns. But look a little further down, if you're 50 years old, the formula only demands a 6.2% savings rate. Think about that. The test demands 78% from a young kid just starting out, but hands out participation trophies to 50-year-olds saving just 6 cents on the dollar. It completely ignores the single most important variable in finance, how long you've actually been working and compounding your money. It's literally just measuring how many years you've been alive.
This whole position trap also distorts another terrifying benchmark that you've probably seen, the average American salary. This is a number that is doing massive damage to people's sense of self-worth. You see it everywhere, anchoring all these lists about whether you're succeeding financially. But honestly, it is dead wrong in 2 totally separate directions. The first error is the actual population it includes. That $59,000 average includes 19-year-olds working part-time, pulling espresso shots. So if you're 38 and making $70,000, you probably feel like you're winning, but you're just being flattered by being compared to teenagers. The true median for a 38-year-old is actually $66,000. But then, the second error cuts the exact opposite way. The mean, or average, income for a 38-year-old is nearly $87,000. Why such a massive gap? Because that mean is artificially inflated by the top 1% of 38-year-olds who are raking in $450,000 a year. So the data either flatters you with teenagers or absolutely crushes you with $500,000 earners. You're just measuring a totally manufactured position.
Oh, and by the way, even that famous $1,000 emergency fund stat, kind of a lie. You constantly hear that most Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency. But if you dig into the actual survey, it just asks how people prefer to pay for one. So if a guy with 80 grand sitting in the bank chooses to put a sudden car repair on his fancy credit card just to get the airline miles, the survey counts him as unable to afford it. It measures preference, not actual capacity. We have got to stop looking at these manufactured positions. Let's go back to Ryan and Brian and look at the real math of flow.
Now, to be perfectly fair to Brian, his true savings rate isn't just that totally pathetic 4% retirement contribution. Every single month when he pays his mortgage, a portion goes to interest, which vanishes, obviously, but a portion goes to principal. And that principal paydown is just money moving from his checking account directly onto his own balance sheet. It's forced, invisible savings. When we add that in, Brian actually has a very respectable 10.2% savings rate. He probably doesn't even realize he's saving that much, but it absolutely counts.
So here is the stark reality of their flow. Ryan is saving 18% of his income. Brian is saving 10.2%. That 8-point gap in behavior is the only real difference between these two guys. It's not crazy dramatic, and neither man is a fool. But flow dictates the future. So let's run both of their scenarios forward 27 years to age 65. We'll strip out inflation and just use a standard 7% real stock market return. At age 38, Brian is ahead by a whopping $180,000. At 45, that gap shrinks down to $128,000. Now, for 14 long years, Brian stays richer, and frankly, neither of them even notices the gap closing. But then, at age 53, the magic crossover hits. In absolute silence, the renter passes the homeowner. No notification on their phones, no alarm bells, and because compounding never, ever sleeps, it doesn't stop there. That compounding engine that spent years slowly closing the gap, it now violently rips it open in the totally opposite direction. At age 65, Ryan retires with over $1.6 million. Brian retires with just over $1 million. Ryan is ahead by $554,000. Just let that sink in for a second. The guy who started 4 times behind walks away $500,000 richer. Now, I know some of you are immediately screaming about house appreciation, and hey, that is a totally fair objection. So let's look at the numbers. Even if we generously hand Brian a sustained 3% real growth rate on his house, above inflation for 27 straight years, which, by the way, beats the best 35-year run in American real estate history, Brian still loses. The crossover just happens a bit later at age 62, and Ryan still wins by $170,000. There is literally no realistic real estate appreciation rate that saves Brian from Ryan's superior flow. The truth is, Brian's massive 4 times lead back at age 38 was never a real lead. It was just a snapshot of a decision he made once at a closing table in 2019, in a market that then did something nobody predicted. It was just weather. And Brian spent years reading that weather report as a scorecard of his own financial discipline. So, what is the right thing to measure if everything else is just an illusion based on timing and real estate weather? Okay, let's dive into your actual, real financial scorecard. Throw out those old checklists. There are 3 flow-based numbers you actually need to care about, and you can calculate all 3 of them tonight. First up is your true savings rate. Take absolutely everything you put toward your future, your retirement accounts, taxable investing, and yes, the principal portion of your mortgage payment, and divide that by your gross income. Remember, the thing that generated Ryan's massive $500,000 victory wasn't a better salary or some genius market returns. It was entirely born from that 8-point gap in his savings rate. It is the single variable in the whole model that you completely control. The second crucial metric is your liquid share. Basically, what fraction of your net worth can you actually deploy? Ryan's liquid share is 100%. He can sell his indexed funds on a random Tuesday afternoon if he wants to. Brian's liquid share, a measly 15%. Over $200,000 of his net worth is literally trapped in the drywall and hallways of the house he lives in. And you can't spend a hallway. You can't rebalance a hallway. If he wants to touch that wealth, he has to either sell the roof over his family's head or pay a bank for the privilege of borrowing against it. A net worth that you can't deploy might look great on the scoreboard, but it isn't actually in the game. The third and final metric is your trajectory delta. This sounds fancy, but you just project what you will have at retirement based on your current flow and subtract what you will actually need to live. But here is the trick. Pay attention only to the sign. Is it positive or is it negative? The exact size of that number is a complete fantasy because literally nobody knows what the market will do over the next 30 years. But the sign, that's robust. Ryan's sign at age 38 was positive, even though he felt like a total failure. Brian's sign was negative, even though he felt on top of the world. And that brings us to the core realization of this whole explainer. Ryan's static photograph, his position, looked absolutely terrible on paper, while his direction was spectacular. Brian, on the other hand, was living a beautiful lie. His photograph was excellent, but his direction was totally mediocre. Every financial list and survey you read just takes a photograph of you. They do not track your flow.
So you might have come into this feeling a bit behind, only to realize that you are actually Ryan. You might be quietly on track, just getting unfairly judged by a broken system. But you need to check your own math honestly, because the exact same arithmetic that completely exonerates the renter also convicts the homeowner. Both men were absolutely certain they knew how they were doing, and both of them were wrong. So I'm going to leave you with this. Are you judging your success by a static photograph, or are you actually pointing